Hey folks, this is a short and simple video on how you can restart or oil your Mastercrafters clock. I always start by working on a towel so I don't scratch the surface of the clock or the face of the clock. This clock is in very bad shape, but regardless, we want to make sure we don't crack or break the crystal. I also put my hand over the crystal to cradle the glass. Hold the girl underneath so you don't bend the wire, so she lays nice and flat. I remove the two screws at the top. They're usually just hand tightened. There's one there. I like to have a little cup or something to hold the small parts so I don't lose them, but they're pretty stable here on the towel. Here's the second one. Of course, if you need to, you can use a wrench. There's the other one, very tiny little screws. And then I remove the two lower screws. There are two small rivets here. Don't remove those, they hold the fence. Just the screws. Once the screws and the nuts are removed, you have a grommet here. It's just gonna slide out of the little gap here in the metal. If you have a Mastercrafters clock that has the light switch on the back, there's a little grommet or nut here. You're gonna wanna unscrew it, but only if it's on the back. If it's on the side, you don't have to do anything, it's fine. So once you remove the screw that holds the light fixture, the whole back assemblage should just lift straight off, like this will now. So just lift it straight off. Watch out for the little timekeeping knob, and there's the grommet. See, it just slides in and out of there. So here's the back of your clock. Just set it aside. Now typically, what happens if the clock stops running is because we have a flywheel here, and the flywheel kind of bops in and out. It kind of pops in, it pops out. The clock is electrified to become magnetized, so it kind of has a magnetic pull on the wheel as it spins, so it pops in and out. So if it has a little resistance, it'll pop out and then it'll pull back in by the magnetic pull. Once in a while, these old clocks get a little jammed up. They work perfectly fine. They just get a little tangled up in the gearing system. You may need to just put your finger in one of these little holes and just gently turn it a little bit so all the gears line back up. Just a couple times, and it should be fine. If the clock is not running when you receive it or you get it in the mail, it could be because in shipping, this kind of popped in or out a little bit, and typically it just needs a little bit of a push, and then electrify it, and it should start spinning. You can see the wheels spinning. This clock is recently repaired, so it's in very good condition, even though the housing is very broken. So typically, the clock will stop. You can plug it in, and if you spin it, should start up and run effortlessly. I prefer to let it run for a few minutes to make sure it's not having other issues like it needs to be oiled. Because if the oil, there's a little fine lubricant, WD-40 is all you should use, but the original manufacturer put some very heavy grease, and then there's oils from residue and dirt and dust over the years. If you have an old clock that hasn't been cleaned and repaired, it may be gummed up with cooking grease or household dust. So I use WD-40 to clean it all out. If your clock that you receive from me starts to make any sort of a little bit of noise or that's unpleasing to the ear, or if it starts and stops, these clocks are good for a lot of years. They've already been around 70 years. They typically just need a little oil, and all I recommend is WD-40. This is not in a WD-40 can, but this is WD-40 in this little bottle here. And all I really do is this clock is running, so I just put the needle right in here, right under, lift the little wheel just gently, just to pop it open, just a little bit. Put the needle in and just a couple pops of oil. And then it should start running. There are interior parts inside, but typically all it needs is just a little oil. There's a pin that runs through the whole motor assemblage, and it tends to get a little dry. You can just oil it a little and pop it in and out a couple of times, and it should run pretty well. I put a little piece of paper towel on the bottom. This is a painted surface, it can't be cleaned, just to protect it and let it run and see how it's doing. If you have a United clock, which I occasionally, not often, occasionally do repairs and resell them, the flywheel will not turn in a counterclockwise, but in a clockwise position. So if you have a United clock, this wheel is going to turn this way. On the Mastercrafters clocks, all of the Mastercrafters clocks that I repair have the Sessions motor, which is more reliable. It's not an Ingram motor, it's not a contained Mastercrafters motor, it's not a Sunbeam motor. They're all the Sessions reliable motor, and they all turn counterclockwise. As you can see, it's slowly moving there. So that's the direction you want to turn it. If you have to change the light bulb, you just undo the light bulb here. All my clocks come with an LED light bulb, which should last for a number of years on very little voltage. And just put the light back in. And then there's the light. Just turn the switch on, make sure it's running properly. And this clock is up and running. She's ticking away there. She's fine. Now just to show how I put the clock back together again, I'm going to unplug the clock, and then I'm going to put the back on, once again cradling the face of the clock, holding the girl so she doesn't get jammed in there and bend the wire. It's very gentle. It's like handling a baby. Again, see the little notch here? The little notch, the grommet slides right onto that notch. The time setting pin comes through the hole first, and then the two small pins. Before you close the clock, it's always a good idea to look and make sure all your wiring is not in the way here. None of it's touching the wheel. You shouldn't have moved anything. These are little spacers in here that keep the clock from being over tightened. If you over tighten the nuts and those spacers weren't in there, you could crack the crystal. So again, I'm going to start by, it doesn't really matter if you put the screws or the nuts in. I just kind of pick whatever's first. This little nut goes in here. Again, hand tightened. I don't crank them hard, because if you crank it hard, even with the spacer, you could crack the crystal. It could pull on the works of the clock and indirectly put pressure on the glass, and it could break the crystal. Okay. So we're doing that now. And then these old clocks, not everything lines up perfectly. A very interesting fact about these clocks is as they age, the plastic or bakelite shrink. So a lot of the metal fittings, things that didn't shrink, don't fit properly anymore. So the back of the clock is actually a little larger than the clock itself. When I make repairs, I actually have to, there's a metal plate inside the clock, I have to cut all those things down. Because a lot of times if you don't cut them down a little bit, as the clock continues to shrink, and it may, it will crack the housing. So things don't always line up. They're 70-year-old clocks, and you know, this one has been through a bit of a war. It's been repaired. I reinforced the bottom. I filled a lot of little holes. She's a very old clock, but she's got some scratches on her face, but she's a thing of beauty and a joy forever. And I really, really love working on these clocks. And I hope you enjoy your clock for many years to come. They really are treasures.